Minecraft is a favourite game amongst many, countless childhood hours invested into playing, discovering, and building. The game was created with simplicity as a key factor. Many of the mechanics and systems present in Minecraft are designed to be obvious and clear to the player. This ideology of simplicity is also reflected in the game's visual and auditory design, which is created with similar goals in mind. Particularly so the game's music. Minecraft's soundtrack is definitely a familiar sound to anyone who has played the game before. Its subtle and nuanced melodies, spontaneously fading in and out, creating an enveloping atmosphere. But where did these sounds come from? Whoever could have created them? And why is this game's soundtrack so memorable, yet so forgettable at the same time? Born and raised in East Germany, a young Daniel Rosenfeld was first introduced to the ways of electronic music by his brother, Henry Rosenfeld, who around his 5th birthday received a PC as a gift. Rosenfeld's brother often dabbled in the fine arts of computer-assisted procrastination, spending time making movies using slideshow software and creating music or 3D art, but never remaining on one task for too long. Rosenfeld's brother would often ask for his opinion while he created, and while Daniel would only reply nonchalantly, he would often observe his brother, who was a large source of inspiration and influence. Rosenfeld was also introduced to Ableton Live by his brother, who told him that, quote, even idiots can make music with it. Rosenfeld instantly fell in love with the software. Humble beginnings ensued. Daniel's first creations were mostly experimentations with the program. Over time, Rosenfeld started to develop his understanding of music through this early exploration. To him, making music felt like a pastime that seemed productive and not useless, like playing video games forever. Over the years, Rosenfeld began to slowly develop his musical style, mostly through experimentation with software such as Ableton. During the same time, Rosenfeld also became immersed in the world of independent video games, along with communities revolving around them, specifically the online platform TIGsource. TIGsource is a forum dedicated to the discussion and creation of indie games and media, and is oftentimes a place where developers, designers, and creators come together to upload their own works, request help or help others, and hold discussions relating to all aspects of game development. Rosenfeld soon became an active contributor to the site, learning all about the delicate art of game design while simultaneously developing his English skills. It was on this very platform where Rosenfeld met Markus Persson, the creator of what would soon become known as Minecraft. At this time, Persson's project was very early on in the development process. The game contained little sounds and no music, and no objective or goal whatsoever. It was instead a perpetual landscape of dirt, grass, and stone, shambled into obscure structures by the game's procedural generation. When making music for Minecraft, Rosenfeld's progress was often halted by a smorgasbord of technical issues. The game was being developed on a now archaic Java engine, a platform not known for technical fidelity. One such issue was that the game originally contained a vast array of looping sounds, such as multiple layers of ambience and music. As Java's extremely limited sound engine could not play even 2 of these looping sounds at once without crashing completely, Rosenfeld was forced to exclude details such as birds, flowing water, or wind in favour of music, which only meant the soundtrack had to be all the more impactful. Scripted music was another impossibility, due to the game's environment rather than the technical side. As the player often travels between biomes, or environmental areas rather rapidly, biome-specific music that was trialed sounded clunky and unpleasant, as ambient sounds and music tracks would switch out abruptly. Fighting music was also disregarded entirely, as fights in the game generally don't last more than a few seconds. And finally, since the game can effectively be played forever, Rosenfeld had to make sure that no matter how many times his music was heard, it would not become annoying or irritating. Overall, Rosenfeld was not left with a huge amount of creative headroom to work with when making the game's soundtrack. His solution, though, was rather impressive. Minecraft was being developed during an indie game boom of sorts. Platforms such as Steam or GameJolt allowed pretty much anyone to publish games that they created. Due to the low budgets and manpower associated with these games, they would often have pixel graphics, a style easy enough to design and produce, but still with the ability to be visually striking. Minecraft followed this trend, even becoming somewhat of a staple for pixel-style indie games. When making the soundtrack, Rosenfeld wanted it to defy expectations. Many independently developed games of this time had music of a chiptune or electrical style, which went hand in hand with pixel graphics, but for Rosenfeld this wasn't adequate. The indie game Dwarf Fortress was actually an unlikely inspiration for how Minecraft's soundtrack would ultimately turn out. The game is a hectic battleground, rendered in a DOS window, unsightly ASCII graphics detailing the dwarf-constructed landscapes and fortresses. Looking at the game from an unbiased perspective, you might expect it to contain a chiptune or tracker-style soundtrack, but while playing you'll instead experience something unusual. As your armies of alcohol-dependent and rambunctious dwarven soldiers do your bidding, you may hear a sliver of a strange six-stringed guitar spouting a calming flamenco tune, a rather odd contrast to the often chaotic nature of Dwarf Fortress. This contrast, this tonal variation between the game and the soundtrack, ultimately ended up being a large influence for how C418 would design Minecraft's music. This, in combination with technical and non-technical limitations, would ultimately shape Minecraft's soundtrack into what it is today. As scripted events were impossible, Persson and Rosenfeld decided to have tracks play at completely random moments, 15 to 30 minutes from the last. This randomness, associated with the game's soundscape, led Rosenfeld to design the music the way we know it, as somber, melancholic, and atmospheric ambient pieces. The soundtrack being designed in this way led to a rather incidental occurrence. As tracks would randomly fade in with no relation to the current game events, players would subconsciously associate tracks that randomly play with whatever task they would happen to be doing at the time. Picture this. While mining, you happen to dig into a cave with a lava pool bubbling away at the bottom. Nestled in between a crag and the lava, some diamonds are nestled, their bright blue colour a startling contrast to the otherwise dreary and grey cave environment. At this moment, the track titled Key slowly fades in. You don't really hear it, as you are preoccupied with extracting the precious minerals, but without thinking, you make a subconscious connection between the song and the event. From now on, the song Key will serve as a marker, a reminder, of the first time you discovered Minecraft's most sought-after mineral. At times, it might appear as though the game knows exactly what track to play and when, despite the erratic nature of the music algorithm. The ability for the player to make connections to the game music was also completely unintentional. Neither Rosenfeld nor Persson foresaw it happening. But this accident was certainly no detriment, as the randomness of the songs has the ability to add whole new layers of meaning and emotion to Minecraft's music. Rosenfeld was, in a way, forced to embrace minimalism in his music, a concept towards which he was perhaps reluctant at first. It's kind of a bizarre notion to think that if Minecraft developers had elected an engine with more sophisticated sound capabilities, Minecraft's soundtrack might actually be nothing like the ambient audioscapes we know of today. Life-changing Moments Seem Minor in Pictures is an album with significant emotional meaning in relation to Rosenfeld's life at the time of its release. The album was created when he decided to quit his job working in an assembly line, a career certainly lacking in creative outlet. This was before Volume Alpha, even before Rosenfeld had met Markus Persson, meaning that he was taking a pretty big leap. My mental headspace at that time was obviously me quitting my job, and being scared shitless doing it. Freelance composer is a job, but it's more often than not a very unlucrative one, and I did have a sort of cushy gig as an assembly person in a factory. It was boring, but I had money, and then I just decided to print out the letter of resignation and walk away. Scary back then, a no-brainer to me now. The Federal Republic of Germany had Wehrpflicht, or obligatory military service, which required male civilians to partake in military duties. In 2011, the service was to be discontinued, although male citizens were required to partake in a final 6 months of military service. As per German law, conscriptees were allowed to repudiate military involvement in favour of Zivildienst, or obligatory community service. Rosenfeld, as a German citizen, was as exempt from this requirement as any other, and the calling came just as he decided to quit his job working in a factory and fulfill his dream as a freelance composer, although, much to Rosenfeld's relief, he was able to do social work instead of military participants. This event, although it happened completely by chance, went against Rosenfeld's new mindset of "I can be independent," a direct opposition to his new view on life. This emotion, the feeling of being forced to do work just after deciding to be independent, is a motif reflected in many of Rosenfeld's compositions. Songs in albums such as 1, 148, 72 Minutes of Fame, and life-changing moments seen minor in pictures all take inspiration from this period of Rosenfeld's life. Although initially niche, the game quickly gained a devoted and increasingly large following, pushing Rosenfeld and Persson to continue working on the game. 2 years after Minecraft's 1.0 release, the first album was launched, containing all of the game's overworld music and a number of bonus tracks. Volume Alpha was named as one of the best game soundtracks of 2011 by journalism site Kotaku, as well as being constantly praised for its evocative and nostalgic melodies by an array of reviews. Alpha was also the first major success that Rosenfeld had experienced from a music release, making it much of a catalyst for Rosenfeld's success as an independent composer. After his social work conscription ended, he moved to Berlin and began a period of travel, visiting many gaming communities around the world. Further on into Minecraft's development, around late 2013 came the release of Volume Beta, the successor of Volume Alpha both chronologically and thematically. Beta contains a much vaster array of thematic settings and tones than Alpha, due to the inclusion of tracks from different in-game environments, such as Creative Mode and the Nether, Minecraft's fiery and lava-filled hell landscape, as well as the game's music disc collection, items that can be found in Jukebox. Beta also marks a major development in Rosenfeld's musical style. In this album, his music is much more emotional, haunting, environmental, and tonal than in Alpha. Volume Beta's thematic progression is reflected in the song The End, the soundtrack to the final dimension in Minecraft. This dimension, also known as The End, is an ominous ring of floating islands, strange plant life, and the ever-watching Endermen, being one of the most difficult regions in the game to traverse and explore, although it also hides the greatest treasures. As the player slowly and painstakingly makes their way across this desolate and hollow microcosm, a familiar tune will ring. The song The End is a collection of many sounds from Volume Alpha, all amalgamated into an introspective and driving ambient piece, a reflection of the memories, created by the subversive ambience of Minecraft's first album. Through emotional, technical, and real-life influence, Rosenfeld managed to create one of the most compelling and unique video game soundtracks of all time. Minecraft's OST stuck out to us due to its unexpectedness and uniqueness, and stuck with us due to its emotional and compelling sound. As for the future, Rosenfeld will continue to create music for Minecraft. A third album is also currently in the works, containing the next generation of Minecraft's soundscape, and the next evolution of Rosenfeld's style. But for now, that's all. Thanks for watching.